mic check, please.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
My name is John Gordon. I'll be your host.
And I'm your host, Katie Burke.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. We bring the resource to you, the DU Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm your host, Chris Jennings. Joining us once again from Northern Indiana, Jay Anglin, our Waterfowl 360 migration editor. What's going on, Jay?
Oh, just getting a suntan, man. Beautiful.
I hear you. It's been a little warm up there this kick off the season. Now, your season in Indiana is open, correct?
Yes.
Okay, and that's regular duck and goose.
But we do have a goose closure right now. We have a little split.
Okay.
Like the first part of their season. Yeah, so it's a little goofy this year, but yeah.
Cool. Well, I wanted to go ahead and get you on here to just provide everyone with a quick habitat update, and we'll just kind of bounce around in the Great Lakes states up there that you cover for our Waterfowl 360 Migration Alert Program. Let's start out with Minnesota, because I know they got a little bit of snow in some parts of the state, and they got a little bit of cold weather. Might have mixed things up a little bit, but what's going on in Minnesota?
Everything's just a little behind, obviously, in terms of like the main, the heart of the migration, like when we start getting into especially the mallards. It seems to me the early season migrants, some moved out of places like Minnesota, but they've loitered a lot. I'm talking blue wings, a lot of woodies. There seem to be loitering in the southern tier of some of those states, even the, Wisconsin and Minnesota. And it's just been, the weather's just been so lame that a lot of birds are, I think, just kind of hanging out. But, we're starting to get those calendar migrants moving in. I mean, besides divers, you're getting a lot of puddle ducks, that are pushing down, not quickly, but just sort of trickling down. And I'm hearing that from all over. Guys are seeing more mallards, pintails, widgeon, et cetera. Minnesota's probably in the hot seat for some good pushes today, tomorrow, the next few days, with all the weather that's coming across the prairie provinces right now. And of course, Montana got hit pretty good. North Dakota's going to get hit a little bit. All those Manitoba birds that are really stacked up in southern Manitoba, they're going to be, I have a feeling they're going to be skedaddling out of there pretty quick in the next few days for sure. And that's going to be good for Minnesota, Wisconsin in the immediate future. And then of course, all those birds will disperse throughout, especially the Western Great Lakes, but some push all the way over to the Atlantic Flyway. So that's a good thing for everybody. Yeah,
and it looks like the end of this week, which is going to be good news for Great Lakes hunters, that temperature is really going to fall out much of Prairie Canada and over into Manitoba, and it looks like maybe Saturday even into Sunday that temp's really going to drop, and that should be a good thing for everyone up there. But I know you got to bounce around a little bit, doing a little diving duck hunting. Where were you hunting, and how was that?
So I've had trips that I've had to move because it's just so bad over here in southern Michigan. There's a few birds around. They just don't do anything. If it's 68, 70 degrees and there's no wind and it's sunny, I mean, why would you?
Mm-hmm.
So life's good. But I was over on St. Clair a couple weeks ago, and I hunted some of the state properties on Harslands Island, over there in the northern part of Lake St. Clair. And I also diver hunted out on the lake with Jeremy Yeoman, and it was pretty spectacular. There was an absolute ton of birds. The weather was great, super windy. It wasn't particularly cold, but it was chilly. But it was very, very windy. It was kind of snotty out. I would say 50 to 100,000 divers were pretty much on the lake, readily, apparent, mostly redheads. So, as far as redheads go, there's an incredible number of them. I'm hearing about strongholds of redheads all over the Great Lakes right now, which is great.
Yeah.
So yeah, hunting was very good. We did well. I left on a Friday, and by Friday afternoon, it was 65, 70 degrees, and there was no wind, and everything kind of shut down. And one of the problems we're having right now, as far as waterfowl hunting goes, I'm a fishing guide, so I'm kind of enjoying it, but this warm weather, and water temps coming up, the fishing's been phenomenal. So all the fishermen that normally kind of start to think about putting their boat away, they're back at it again. And it's almost borderline early summer pressure levels. So you're seeing a lot of guys fishing. And so this is, as far as divers go, especially out on open water, they're getting pushed around a lot, and they don't particularly like getting bumped repeatedly. So That's a problem, especially for the guides that are doing it every day because they have to chase them around and figure out where they are. And then locally here, for example, any of these lakes around here, southern Michigan, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, there's just so many guys out fishing. The birds are getting pushed off, and there's not a lot of places to go. A lot of the marshes are, frankly, dried up. So where those birds go is probably going to end up in a flooded refuge or on a river system somewhere where they can get away from, pressure from hunting and fishing. So a lot of guys that aren't seeing birds, I suspect there's probably birds in the area. They just aren't seeing them because they're not where they can be seen,
Yeah, and as far as, you mentioned some dry, I mean, that's the topic of conversation down here in the Mid-South with, Tennessee and Arkansas and Mississippi. We're bone dry. And are you seeing, is it very similar up there in like northern Indiana, southern Michigan? Are you guys pretty dry up there as well?
Yeah, it's terrible. But, we've had a couple of substantial water, precipitation periods here. In the last 2 weeks, we've had two. And I think in some areas it counts for probably, at least 3 or 4 inches of rain in some areas, but it probably had 2 or 2+. And I think the problem is it's so dry that even when you do get some rain, you get a little surface water, you get a little sheet water in a corner of a field where it's been compressed by tractors and whatnot. And then the next day, once it's kind of, if the ground, sort of reactivated, it just sucks it right in. So I see water. I'm out looking around, scouting. I'm on my way to the river, and I see water in a little wet spot in the field that I've hunted. And I'm like, oh, yeah, they're going to be in there. And then I come by the afternoon, it's long gone. So it's going to take a substantial amount of precipitation for us to get recharged. And I think that's for everybody I'm talking to, all the way to the Atlantic and back west, it's just a drop. And so I do believe that's having a huge impact on not just, the number of birds guys are able to actually, target, but birds there's not a whole lot of places for them to go. So the bottom line is, there's going to be birds around, but you just really have to work hard to find them.
Yeah. Are you hearing anything? Have you gotten any reports out of Ohio?
So Ohio is, blessed with Lake Erie marshes, and they're vast, and there's a whole bunch of them, and then there are some public, areas there, and they're always going to have. It's just like St. Clair. They're always going to have a good push of mallards and black ducks and pintails and of course tons of divers out on the lake. So things are good there as usual. Inland, I'm hearing a few reports of your typical mid-season stuff. Green wings, woodies, handful of mallards here and there. Of course, there's a few bufflehead that get reported on the lakes. But bottom line is they're shaping up well over there, just like St. Clair and Southeast Michigan. But the goose thing is pretty much the highlight of Ohio, Indiana, Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, et cetera. It is incredible numbers of Canada geese. We're just stacked with them here, even though we're closed right now in the North Zone in Indiana. And it may be the most Canada geese I've ever seen in this general region this early in the season. It is phenomenal.
I was going to say that seems a little early. I know, those birds don't really like to push too much further south than that, but it still seems pretty early for large numbers of Canada geese to be stacking up there in northern Indiana. So I guess that's a blessing. You take advantage of that as soon as the season comes in. Absolutely.
And it was really good last week leading up to when it closed. And even today, this morning I was working and it's warm out. I was going to go deer hunting. I decided not to. And just waves of them going over the house, going down here to feed about a mile south of me, on a field that no one can hunt. And they're just treating it like a refuge. But I mean, those birds have been here for a while. And each week I see a few new faces here and there, snow mixed in, a few specks. But there are a lot of smaller race birds mixed in. So obviously a lot of those birds from here, southern, James Bay and Hudson Bay birds, a lot of those birds are down here already, which is a little earlier than normal, maybe, but not totally unprecedented for sure.
Yeah. Just to go back into, last week you did the migration alert for Wisconsin. That upper Mississippi River, what is it, Pool 9, Pool 8, you had gotten
7, 8, 9.
Yeah, 7, 8, 9. You guys had gotten some pretty good reports of basically calendar ducks. I mean, those canvasbacks tend to show up with the calendar. What else were you hearing about that area over there? I know there's a lot of duck hunters in that area.
The biggest thing is the lack of mallards. Of course, you can go out and see mallards, and if you get a shot at a couple, great. But it is just the first week of November, so I don't think anybody should be shocked. And right on time, the peak canvasback numbers tend to be the first week or two of November on those upper Mississippi pools. And here we go. We're going to freeze up in much of Prairie Canada, Manitoba, which is where a lot of the mallards come from that filter down through Wisconsin into Indiana and Illinois, and then further south eventually, those birds are going to show up right on time. So I would say, the next 2 weeks, you're going to hear great reports coming out of that corridor and through south, all the way through over towards me in northern Indiana. But, as far as bird numbers in Wisconsin, it's really spotty. And again, it goes back to the water thing. I think areas that have a lot of large water, big water, will have a few more birds. And then areas that have marshes that are associated with rivers probably have more birds. But the classic, great, big, huge, vast wetlands that Wisconsin's known for, a lot of those are just super low right now, with the ones that have a lack of water control certainly are,
It sounds like the Canada goose game is going to be, what most hunters are going to be out after, which is not a bad thing. I mean, I'm hearing positive reports out of Indiana, Michigan, Wisconsin, even some southern Minnesota. Guys seem to really be cashing in, and that reflects directly on some of the reports you're giving here today. Anything else you can think of about that Great Lakes region that that hunters should kind of pay attention to right now?
Well, so many guys just don't get into diver hunting, and certainly not big water diver hunting. And we are blessed with incredible open water diver hunting throughout the Great Lakes. And really the guys that have been shooting longtails and occasional scoters, they've been, of all the people I talk to, that is definitely the group that is just walking away with a great big smile on their face every single time. And we picked up an incredible number of longtails early, going back a couple weeks. And so those guys are really capitalizing on that. And that's something that's really increased in popularity all over, along the coast and throughout the Great Lakes. But, that just tells you a lot of times, we talk about these calendar birds, if they have a place to go and feed, they bounce down. It takes a day or two and boom, they're on that. It could be the wintering ground for most of those birds. And they've been there since mid-October. So that's pretty amazing. I guess that'd be one thing I would that kind of pops out at me.
Awesome. Hey, and before we let you go, just like usual, whenever we have you on here, you are a fishing guide. How's the steelhead fishing up there?
Well, it's funny you'd ask. Because of the low water and the warm temperatures and all that, and maybe a little maintenance on dams and things like that, because it has been nice. It's been a little bit impeded, but right now I had the best day I've had all year yesterday, and things are really starting to pop. So everything's coming together. It's mid-November. Or we're coming up on mid-November when I usually tell people it can go either way. We can be froze out completely, or it might be phenomenal. And I'm guessing this year's going to be phenomenal. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Awesome. Well, Jay, man, thanks. I appreciate it. Thanks for taking the time, and thanks for putting those migration alerts together. I know for anybody who's looking for those alerts, you can go to ducks.org/migration. Check all those out from the Great Lakes states. Again, thanks a lot, Jay. I appreciate it.
It's always great being here, folks. Have a good time out there. Be careful.
I'd like to thank my guest, Jay Anglin, for coming on and providing us with a little Great Lakes habitat and hunting update. I'd like to thank our producer, Chris Isaac, for putting the show together and getting it out to you. And I'd like to thank you, the listener, for joining us on the DU podcast and supporting wetlands conservation.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the DU Podcast. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and visit www.ducks.org/DU Podcast for resources based on today's topics, as well as access to more episodes. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the ducks. Stay tuned to the ducks.